El News 24 únicamente en i24 News.
Ой, осторожно. У него мало таких бородавочек, у него как-то побольше на спине.
Welcome, you're watching i24 News, coming to you live from Tel Aviv. The top stories this hour. The US President Joe Biden joins 18 world leaders in calling for the release of the hostages still being held in Gaza. The Israeli War Cabinet meets to discuss an impending operation in Rafah, the last stronghold of Hamas in Gaza. And sirens blare across Israel's northern border communities amid ongoing fighting between the IDF and the Iranian-backed proxy Hezbollah. First, dozens of people, including the family members of the hostages still being held in Gaza, are protesting outside the IDF headquarters in Tel Aviv. They're demanding the government do more to secure the release of their loved ones. The protests were in part triggered by a newly published Hamas propaganda video, which shows 23-year-old Israeli-American Hersh Goldberg-Polin. Hersh's parents told Israeli media that they had no idea their son was alive before they saw the video. Our correspondent Ariel Osseran reports.
Israel's War Cabinet is convening on Thursday afternoon to discuss efforts to break the stalemate in negotiations between Israel and Hamas. The meeting takes on extra urgency after a Hamas video highlighted the plight of Israeli hostages.
קוראים לי הירש גולדברג פולין. אני הבן של יונתן ורייצ'ל.
The video of 23-year-old American-Israeli hostage Hersh Goldberg-Polin was his first sign of life from captivity since he was kidnapped to Gaza on October 7th. Hersh had attended the Nova Music Festival at Kibbutz Re'im with friends and sought refuge in a shelter when Hamas stormed the outdoor rave. He was last seen in this video after sustaining serious wounds before taken by Hamas terrorists into Gaza.
אמא, אבא, ליבי ואורלי. אני אוהב אתכם מאוד. אני מתגעגע אליכם מאוד, ואני חושב עליכם בכל יום שאני נמצא פה. אני יודע שאתם למעלה עושים הכל כדי שאני אחזור הביתה כמה שיותר מהר. אני צריך שתישארו חזקים בשבילי, ולא להפסיק להילחם עד שאני וכל אחד ואחת מהחטופים נחזור הביתה לשלום. אני מצפה ומקווה להיות איתכם בקרוב, אחרי שכל השיגעון הזה ייגמר.
Seeing a video of Hersh today is overwhelming. We're relieved to see him alive. But we are also concerned about his health and well-being, as well as that of all of the other hostages and all of those suffering in this region.
Although Israel calls such videos psychological warfare, Hersh's parents allowed it to air, urging Israeli leaders and international mediators to reach a deal for the release of Hersh and the other 132 hostages, many of whom are believed to be already dead.
And Hersh, if you can hear this, we heard your voice today for the first time in 201 days. And if you can hear us, I am telling you, we are telling you, we love you, stay strong, survive.
Shortly after the release of the video, hundreds of Israelis began protesting spontaneously outside Prime Minister Netanyahu's Jerusalem residence in what was labeled a rage demonstration. One protester was arrested during clashes with police.
133 hostages are still being held by Hamas in Gaza for over 200 days in inhumane conditions. Until Hamas releases our hostages, the IDF will continue to pursue Hamas everywhere in Gaza. This is an urgent call for action. We will leave no stone unturned in our efforts to find our hostages.
Meanwhile, calls for an Israeli initiative for a deal are growing as the time for the hostages continues to run out.
Well, our correspondent Balir Sladin is in Tel Aviv, where some of the families of the hostages have been protesting today. And he has the latest on reports an Egyptian delegation is due in Israel tomorrow.
Yes, so while the families of the hostages and their supporters here behind me in front of the Korea are blocking the road and pressuring the cabinet to reach a deal with Hamas in order to see the loved ones back in their home in Israel. Now we're getting some new reports regarding possible resume of talks between Hamas and Israel indirectly, of course, in order to reach a deal. We have an American proposal, a new one that calls for the release of the hostages with a longer truce. We don't know the exact details of that, but what we're having is a new report regarding the visit that happened yesterday by Herzi Halevi, the IDF chief of staff, and also the head of the Mossad, Dedi Barnea. Both of them were in Cairo, Egypt yesterday, and apparently the Egyptians have a new proposal for them. Now what we're getting is that the Egyptians are proposing a truce for up to 1 year. No hostilities will be there between Israel and Hamas, and on the other hand there will be a release of all the hostages. Now the catch here, if we can say that, is that during this 1 year period there will be talks that would actually lead to an establishment of a Palestinian state. Now this could be an interesting proposal from the Egyptians that we are getting also, that an Egyptian delegation is coming to Israel tomorrow here on Friday in order to discuss a possible continuation of the talks after the fails that happened last week when Hamas declined the latest American proposal. Now, this interesting proposal from the Egyptians could not be, or as we see it, is actually challenging both the Palestinians, both Hamas and also Israel, because it is, of course, very difficult for the Israelis to accept an establishment of a Palestinian state. We've heard that over and over again from Netanyahu, but we're also understanding that Hamas is not interested in any proposal that does not include a permanent ceasefire. Now, a truce for 1 year could be an interesting proposal for Hamas. We just need to wait and see. Of course, there's no approval from Israel yet, but Herzi Halevi and Dedi Barnea actually vowed that they will represent this proposal for the Israeli cabinet today and then get more information on that.
Well, with me in the studio this hour, Danny Ayalon is the former Israeli ambassador to the United States. Good evening to you, Ambassador. And Benjamin Anthony is the CEO of the Miriam Institute. Welcome to you as well, Benjamin. And I'll start with you, if I may. Amid signs now that the IDF is preparing to go into Rafah, we're hearing a last call from the families to the government to really focus on the hostage negotiations. We've got this Egyptian delegation tomorrow. Where do you think the focus should be right now?
I think that there needs to be a return to the ratcheting up of military pressure on Hamas. I think they've had more than enough time to show whether or not they're willing to enter into some sort of deal to release the remaining hostages, whether those hostages be alive or dead, whatever state and condition they may be in. I think that they've shown that they have no intention of doing so. American condemnations and the international community's calls for Hamas to release the hostages, in my opinion, cuts no sway whatsoever with Hamas. We need to go back to the theory that started at the beginning of this, which is to push forward into the Gaza Strip, to put the jackboots of the IDF on the neck of the leadership of Hamas, and only under those conditions might we see a hostage release deal. And naturally the parents are more than right and appropriately outraged about the lack of the return of their loved ones.
Ambassador Danny Ayalon, just looking at what President Biden did today, he and 17 other world leaders calling on Hamas to release the hostages. Why did it take them 200 days to do that?
It's a very good question, but certainly this should be a direct pressure on Hamas from all these 17 leaders, 17 countries, but it is also a pressure, indirectly though, on Egypt and Qatar mainly, to step up and continue to put much more pressure on Hamas. And it is quite clear that Qatar has not exhausted all its efforts or all its capabilities on pressuring Hamas. This is what is needed now. And in the absence of that, I guess the Rafah operation is quite imminent.
OK, Danny, thank you. Well, the War Cabinet did meet today to discuss plans to enter Rafah. The IDF finalising preparations to enter the last Hamas stronghold in Gaza. And that includes withdrawing the Nahar Brigade, which has been overseeing a corridor which cuts the Gaza Strip in half from east to west. Benjamin, Anthony, is it the right time then for the IDF to go into Rafah? We've been talking about this for such a long time now. We nevertheless do seem to be at a critical stage when it comes to the hostage negotiations. Do you still think, that the IDF needs to go into Rafah?
100%. I mean, the right time for the IDF to go into Rafah was prior to Ramadan. If anybody wanted to be conservative about that and give a slight pause, it ought to have been the first day of Ramadan and to see whether or not there was any will among Hamas for a release of the hostages. Given that there was no such will, we should have pushed forward. As I say, wars take on a momentum of their own. And one of the worst things that can happen in a war is to lose that momentum. Unfortunately, we did that, but now is the time to move back in there. And I have no concerns about our ability to dismantle the remaining battalions of Hamas inside the Gaza Strip. And we're capable of doing it.
I want to ask you both about comments made by a Hamas official who spoke to the Associated Press. He says Hamas is willing to disarm and observe a 5-year ceasefire if Israel agrees to a state based on the pre-1967 borders. What do you make of that?
I think it's another bold statement that shows that Hamas is completely out of touch with the reality, the fact that Hamas does not even recognize Israel's right to exist, let alone that its own charter is actually they are sworn on the demise of Israel and Jews worldwide. They have not even accepted a two-state solution with the Oslo agreements. So whatever they say now is another ploy, maybe just to try and save the neck of Def and Sinwar, which we are not going to bite.
Do you think this is a sign of desperation from Hamas? They seem to have drastically changed their position, although another official, I should point out, in another interview went on to say that any recognition of Israel would be temporary.
Yeah, just a couple of points to your earlier question. I think one of the reasons you're seeing President Biden and the other world leaders call for the release of the hostages is because they can see Israel is ratcheting up to move into Rafah. And the only way that can possibly be averted is for the hostages to be released. The other thing that I will say is, in my opinion, the two-state solution was always a complete load of nonsense, ought to be consigned to the dustbin of history at the point of its birth and conception. And if anyone had any doubts about that, once you've got Hamas endorsing it, you realise that it can only be a plan and a policy that is deleterious to the good health of the state of Israel.
I don't want to go down the rabbit hole too much, but
sure.
What is the alternative?
Well, I've personally put alternatives forward. I don't think that now is the time to talk about establishing a state for the Palestinian Arabs in any way, shape or form. But there are alternatives. I think that the policy idea, the new state solution, which calls for the establishment of the state for the Palestinian Arabs in Gaza with contiguity into the Sinai Peninsula, is one that I put together, championed, talked to the White House, talked to the House and to the Senate. I think that it's worth looking at, but a precondition for that was the complete military toppling of Hamas, something we're now in the midst of doing. I think when the dust settles, we can perhaps look at in what constellation we could bring about some sort of autonomy or statelet for the Palestinian Arabs, but not now.
Well, on that note, Egypt warned today that an Israeli offensive in Rafah could have catastrophic consequences. Earlier, President Sisi reiterated Cairo's firm stance against the displacement of Gazans into Egypt's Sinai province. Take a listen.
Since the developments that the region has witnessed over the past months and the Israeli war on the Gaza Strip, the Egyptian stance from the first moment has been to completely reject any displacement of the Palestinians from their land into Sinai or any other place in order to protect the Palestinian cause from liquidation and to defend Egypt's national security. Also, our steadfast position of determination to work extensively towards reaching a ceasefire and ensuring access for humanitarian aid and efforts to establish the Palestinian independent and sovereign state in order for the Palestinians to gain their legitimate rights.
So just picking up on what Benjamin was saying, I mean, the Egyptians are very clear. They don't want even Palestinian refugees to temporarily seek shelter in Sinai. They've been, strengthening their border week after week ever since October 7th. It looks unlikely that Egypt will work with Israel on this at all.
Well, it is actually very complex and nuanced, Laura. You know that Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood, which Hamas is a part of, is breathing at the neck of the regime, the secular regime in Cairo. Hamas is a sworn enemy to the entire, actually, Middle East Sunni governments regimes. So it's actually, they really share the same, I would say, interest with Israel to do away with Hamas, but they cannot say it out loud because of fear of the people in their own countries, which are being incited by Hamas and the likes, and of course the Palestinians. So they have to find a real fine line. So they talk tough, but at the same time, if Egypt's interests are not actually being breached, that means no Palestinians are moving towards the Sinai, they will go along, even though maybe screaming and kicking, but it's just a position that they have to show vis-a-vis the Palestinians and their own population.
And how is this going to work, Benjamin? Because the IDF would have to work with Egypt to a certain extent to secure the Philadelphia corridor, wouldn't it? The border into Sinai.
You know, I think if we were talking about breaching the border and moving Palestinian Arabs from Gaza into the Sinai Peninsula, then Sisi might have some reason to speak out. But actually what goes on within the Gaza Strip is not largely any of his concerns. The Israel Defense Forces is responding to the most brutal attack upon our people. We're all aware of what happened there. And I would take a slightly different view of Sisi and Egypt. I think actually the Egyptians, as difficult as it may be for them to think about Hamas being absorbed into Sinai, they're massively culpable for what took place on October the 7th. So many of Hamas's know-how came out of the Gaza Strip into the Sinai Peninsula on their watch, up to Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, then Iran, and then returned through the same crescent back into the Gaza Strip, again via the Sinai Peninsula, and then launched against the people of Israel. I think Sisi has to take culpability and some responsibility for it, rather than merely standing up and grandstanding.
Nonetheless, Egypt is an important ally for Israel.
Yeah, no, Egypt was certainly derelict on the Philadelphia road. As long as it doesn't concern their own security, they wouldn't mind Israel holding the hot potato. This is for sure. But when we look at the bigger picture, there is no other way than to continue and have the peace with Egypt for the region, as a whole. But Egypt should also understand one thing which is very important, and this is also relates to one of your earlier questions, why Israel did not go into Rafah yet. And that is specifically because we did not want the Palestinians in Rafah to be actually swarming over and stampeding over the border with Egypt. So this is why we had to do it in a very, very methodical way, although from a maneuverability and from a military strategy would have made more sense to do a pincer maneuver on both sides.
Why do you think they didn't do that?
I think because of concern with Egypt. I think there was a lot of discussion. Egypt was very concerned in the beginning of the war that Israel will push the Palestinians over to the Sinai, and there was a lot of high-level talks about it. And in order to allay some of their fears, they were told that the plans are to go methodically from south to north. From north to south, and not to do any kind of a overthrow of Rafah towards Egypt.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I just think that this speaks to the haplessness of the Biden administration's diplomatic efforts. I think with more muscular diplomacy, Egypt could have been compelled to absorbing Gazans into the Sinai Peninsula. I mean, the State of Israel was compelled to flooding the Gaza Strip with humanitarian aid without the Gazans having to so much as give the humanitarian gesture of returning our hostages. The same level of pressure ought to have been applied to Egypt with the same outcome. A result that maybe the Egyptians don't like, but have to live with. Certainly, I don't think that would breach or destroy the peace agreements we have with Egypt, were it to take place.
Let's talk about President Biden and the US policy then, because President Biden has just had a big legislative win, hasn't he? He managed to get Congress to pass that $95 billion aid package, which includes $17 billion in military aid for Israel. What is interesting now is that he's sending his Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, to Saudi Arabia at the weekend for the World Economic Forum. The question is whether he will be able to make any progress at all with this mega deal, as it's been called, getting some kind of normalization deal for Israel. What do you think? And is there any hope of that still happening?
It's very unlikely, given the fact that, first of all, there's still going on a war in Gaza. Secondly, I'm not sure the Saudis are going to get what they want from the Americans, including their, although it's civil, the first civil nuclear, capabilities. It's a long way off until we can do something, can have any traction. But Biden, we have to understand, he is facing a very tough campaign, for re-election from his point of view. So he has to walk a very fine line. Strategically, he is very much with Israel. The United States is very much with Israel. We know that. The $14 billion is just the last testament to that. But from a political point of view, he also has to show some sympathy with the Palestinians. And also he wants to avoid a widening of the war. Hence, it's a very, very, I would say, feeble response to Iran, which is, I think, counterproductive to the entire region and also ultimately to American interests.
The take the win comments from
Absolutely.
the White House. Benjamin, your thoughts on that? Do you think Tony Blinken can advance the Abraham Accords at all?
No, I agree that the moment's not ripe for that, but I do think there's some very positive news. I was somewhat skeptical about the durability of the Abraham Accords. We saw them play out in wonderful and successful fashion when Iran launched its attack from its sovereign soil towards our sovereign soil. I thought they'd be particularly stress test in the face of a long and enduring fight inside the Gaza Strip. That's not been the case, so that's a win that we can take. We can't look at ballistic missiles being fired towards us as a win. And I think that politically, Biden would do well were he to stop handcuffing and restraining Israel when it comes to finishing off the military task inside the Gaza Strip. The quicker it's finished off by way of going into Rafah, dismantling those battalions, the quicker he will be able to refocus the discussion and the discourse, maybe on domestic issues, maybe on international affairs, but the focus will reduce when it comes to Israel and the Gaza Strip.
And of course, domestic issues very much come into play. We're just a few months out from the election. The Democratic Party convention in just 2 months' time. The last thing President Biden wants are terrible images coming out of Rafah.
Absolutely. But Laura, we have to remember that Americans, by and large, and actually historically, always vote on domestic issues, on the economy, never on foreign policy. And this will be the case as well. But the battle is in the key states, in the swing states, especially Pennsylvania and Michigan and Minnesota. And there, 1% moving from one side to the other can actually cost Biden the presidency. And unfortunately, we have both in Michigan and in Minnesota a small but very vociferous base of Democrats which are Islamic. Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, a lot of Arab Americans are saying that they won't vote for Biden. I imagine that they'll need it, but are they likely to vote for Donald Trump? I think not. I think that they're just going to abstain in any such case. If they're so opposed to what Israel is doing with American assistance inside the Gaza Strip, they may well sit it out. I can't see them casting their vote in favor of Donald Trump, who most people think would be more supportive of Israel's desire to mop up the effort in the Gaza Strip right now.
Thank you both. Well, IDF's engineering units have been at the heart of the campaign against Hamas in Gaza, used to map and destroy the group's extensive underground tunnel network. We've got more for you in this report.
Here we are again, in Han Yunis, for what should be the last time. Engineer Battalion Commander Major Gilad M. is waiting for us in the heart of Hamed District. The men of this unit have been in Gaza for more than 5 months. All around, the destruction is almost total. Their mission is to complete the destruction of the remaining tunnels and terrorist infrastructures, and there's still a lot of them.
Today, we are going to attack alongside the Battalion Action Unit, and our mission will be to take control of the area. If we find enemies on our way, we will eliminate them. And in this area, there are many houses of Hamas leaders that we're destroying. Here in Khan Yunis, we can see in front of us is the northern district of the city. For the moment, the machines are working to reinforce the security of the axis, which crosses the Gaza Strip. We dig ditches, reinforce positions, etc., so that if terrorists try to infiltrate, they cannot do so. This war is the moment of truth for the combat engineers. It's a real challenge. Those known as the Fortnite generation know how to use new cutting-edge technologies and apply them to the field almost immediately. These young people are truly brilliant. We do not destroy simply for the sake of destroying. We blow up buildings where we have found irrefutable evidence of Hamas's presence, and the desolation that we see all around us is due to Hamas, who cynically uses the majority of the homes of the civilian population.
These fighters that decimated the Hamas division of Han Yunis killed thousands of terrorists and destroyed more than 30 kilometers of underground tunnels. They are now preparing to enter the refugee camps in central Gaza Strip and also preparing the operation in Rafah.
Since the start of this conflict, we have learned a lot. I think that for now, this operation has been carried out very well. For a long time, people didn't trust us, or we were afraid of the price to pay, but this campaign brought convincing results. I say this as an officer on the ground, and we have done damage to Hamas. It will take them decades to recover. And for now, we must continue to keep the pressure on.
4 months after setting foot in Han Yunis, they have mixed feelings. They didn't succeed in freeing all the hostages, and they're now preparing their exit.
We must do everything to bring the hostages home. We have an obligation to our people, to our country. We must do everything, absolutely everything, to bring them back.
עידית כאן קודקוד, קדימה, רשאי בספירה. כאן קודקוד, עבודה יפה, דווח בלגיה שלך אבו.
It's good to see you without dust in your eyes, or explosions all around.
There's still dust because I will take my first shower at home.
אבל כן. אנחנו נוסעים עכשיו לאסוף את...
We're going to pick up Dor from nursery school and Agam from school. They don't know that I'm coming to pick them up. It's better not to give them false hope. I could receive a recall order at any moment, so I prefer not to tell them anything and not to hurt them.
עדיף להפתיע ולא לאכזב. דרך להביא את אגם? טוב.
דאדי! דאדי!
חיים שלי.
אתה הולך לישון איתנו?
כן, אני נשאר לישון איתנו.
אני רוצה שהיום תרדים אותי במיטה. אני שהיום תרדים אותי במיטה.
Time for a short break. When we come back, we'll head to the north of Israel, where sirens have been blaring amid the latest attacks from the Iranian-backed proxy Hezbollah. Stay tuned.
Israel is in a state of war.
Families completely gunned down in their beds. We have no idea where is she.
As our soldiers are fighting on the front lines, but the general perception is something that certainly needs to be fought as well.
Esta semana en News 24, Israel bajo ataque. News 24 en español trae el análisis y la información de los acontecimientos de la guerra Espadas de Hierro.
Entrevistas exclusivas, reportes desde la zona de guerra, la reacción de los países hispanoparlantes.
News 24, el único medio en español que te mantiene informado y conectado con la comunidad latina en Israel. News 24, únicamente en i24 News.
Welcome back, and let's turn our attentions now to the north of Israel and the ongoing war with the Iranian-backed proxy Hezbollah. Sirens have been blaring across Israel's northern communities this Thursday, including in Kiryat Shmona and Metula. Our Zach Andrews joins us now from the north of Israel as night falls. Zach, what's happening up there?
Yeah, at this point in the night, it's a bit quieter than it was yesterday. Yesterday, we had Hezbollah claim responsibility for 6 attacks. There was a considerable amount of cross-border fire. At this point tonight, we're looking at 3 attacks Hezbollah has claimed responsibility for, including what appears to be launches on Kiryat Shmona. We also had an alarm in Arab el-Ramshi. No reports coming in at this point in the night of any casualties or damage to homes, civilian infrastructure. It does appear, like we usually see, Hezbollah has been targeting some of the military installations, the IDF outposts that are dotted along the border. In southern Lebanon, we continue to see airstrikes taking place in multiple locations. The IDF has not been listing or labeling out specifically where exactly they've been focused. They're focusing their fire like they usually do. However, we've seen in Lebanese media channels they're reporting some of these strike locations. They're locations that have been hit before. They're very close to the border. We've also seen the Lebanese civil defense activated. They've been local firefighters, it appears, putting out some wildland fires that have started as a result of what appears to be some cross-border fire. One of those fires very close to the border fence as well, but it looks like that that fire has been put out, from what I can tell, and those firefighters were able to do so uneventfully and safely.
And Zach, let's talk about the broader picture, because there are some signs that Hezbollah's backers in Tehran are changing their strategy in Syria as a result of a series of strikes blamed on Israel, including the most famous, that strike which took out General Zahidi in Damascus recently. What's happening?
Yeah, so yesterday, papers in Beirut citing a Hezbollah source, it looks like a lone source, said that Hezbollah was informed that the IRGC would be pulling out or removing itself from Syria. That's a considerable moment, but one, we've heard similar lines like this before, like back in December. We had heard that the IRGC was going to be withdrawing or sizing down its presence in and around Damascus. And then, of course, that strike took place on April 1st. So not paying too much credence to, of course, a terror group's sources or messaging as it's being dispersed throughout media in Lebanon. We see today that it's been picked up by Saudi media channels. What could be interesting is that this Hezbollah source has claimed that Hezbollah will be the replacement, or is going to fill this void that's left by the IRGC, as well as Iraqi-backed militias that are pro-Iran, that they would be inside the Syrian spaces. Again, this is also convoluted, and it does appear to be the messaging wing of Hezbollah is pushing this out anyway. So obviously the IRGC's suffered serious blows, not just on April 1st when we saw that strike on the consulate, but there's been multiple other IRGC figures that have been killed before that strike in Syria. So the airstrikes, which again the Israelis have not stated outside of the April 1st strike that they were involved with these other IRGC strikes, but they've obviously inflicted some heavy cost or pain within the IRGC. Can they operate and continue their main priority or their main goals of these weapon shipments through Syria and bolstering up these militias that support the Assad regime? They can likely do that from wherever they need to be. So a physical presence on the ground from high-ranking IRGC officials in Syria, potentially not something we see going forward. But then again, these are reports again, or this is being pushed out by Hezbollah themselves. So paying it all with a grain of salt.
Zach, thank you very much. Zach Andrews there in the north of Israel. With me in the studio this hour, Danny Ayalon is the former Israeli ambassador to the United States, and Benjamin Anthony is the CEO of the Miriam Institute. Thank you for staying on, both of you. Danny, the situation in the north, entire communities emptied out of their residents, still no sign they can go home. We did see some pretty heavy fighting yesterday. And the IDF is increasingly hawkish, says it has taken out quite a lot of Hezbollah positions now. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, everybody knows that the situation is not sustainable, where Israelis cannot go back to their homes, about 60, 70,000 in our most northern towns. So they will have to come back. The only way for them to come back is until the Hezbollah is pushed back or pushed up, down certainly northern of the Litani, so they're not even in eyesight with the Israeli communities on the
because
north.
They are literally just a few hundred meters away.
Absolutely.
From these communities.
So there are two efforts. There is the diplomatic effort, which has been actually led by France so far, but with to no avail. The French diplomacy does not have any leverages over Lebanon. There are the Americans, Amos Hochstein, which is the emissary, the envoy of the administration, the American administration to Lebanon. He's also supposed to come into the region. But at the same time, we have this tit for tat, but it's more than that, because what we see that Israel continuously is peeling off strategic assets of the Hezbollah, in a way paving the way that if diplomatic efforts do not come to fruition, then a ground operation will have to take place. And already now the IDF is planning it, and by degrading the Hezbollah defense operations.
Benjamin, do you agree with that? Do you think the IDF should launch a ground invasion into Lebanon? How long could that last? Would we see Israeli soldiers stuck in southern Lebanon for an undetermined length of time?
I think the IDF should have launched the ground offensive into Lebanon on October the 8th when Hezbollah started to rocket northern Israel. You've got an untenable situation up in the north of Israel. It's a completely barren area at this time. And I think that diplomatic efforts should have long ago been abandoned, because there's already a very clear, codified, ratified diplomatic solution to this. It's called Resolution 1701. It's not adhered to by Hezbollah at all. It's not enforceable. The only way to deal with this is to move forward and to eliminate that threat. And I actually was a minority voice, but it doesn't matter. I'm not interested in majority minority when it comes to these ideas. I actually think that the IDF would have been better served to stay its hand in Gaza, and instead, after October 7th, once Hezbollah opened fire, to go north to defang that much more potent, much more dangerous enemy to our north, to not seek to eliminate it completely, because that would take something of a broader effort, although that has to come eventually, but certainly downgrade its capabilities from the air. And we're actually seeing that happening. 40 targets were hit simultaneously. We have the ability to hit up to 300 targets simultaneously at any given time from our Air Force. And there's actually been the use of munitions that include bunker busters of late. So there is that ratcheting up, but it's not a heavy enough price. There are 100,000 fighters Hezbollah has. I think we've taken off about 250 of them. That's not sufficient.
All right. Benjamin, thank you. Well, the United Arab Emirates has been at the forefront of international aid efforts in Gaza, and Dubai is now hosting a conference on how to better coordinate efforts to ease the civilian suffering in the Strip. Our correspondent Bastien Bory was at the conference.
Gaza, Ukraine, Sudan, Somalia, Myanmar, Syria, Haiti, Sub-Saharan Africa. In all, 55 armed conflicts are underway between states, 8 of which are open wars. And while violence is on the increase, humanitarian efforts are not keeping pace, despite the $25 billion in aid spent each year by the international community.
When we have any emergency in any country, we check if we can support from the same country with the crisis happened, if UNHCR have a presence there. If not, we are checking the neighbor country. If not, we are doing some kind of support from global stockpile. And the largest one is in Dubai. Well, UNHCR emergency response, the global capacity for 1.5 million beneficiary within 72 hours. From Dubai, we are able to support 665,000 POC, so more than the 50%. So this is the way we respond. In addition to that, this relates to the supply, like deliver the item.
And this is precisely where the problem lies. Already problematic in Ukraine, where many organizations are buying humanitarian aid in Ukrainian stores, the supply of basic necessities is also a matter of debate in Gaza, where Israelis and Palestinians are blaming each other. Some judge that this aid is being intercepted by Hamas, while others believe that the IDF is deliberately interrupting a large part of the humanitarian effort. Be that as it may, in 2024, 1 in 5 of the world's children will be living in a conflict or a climatic disaster zone. As a result, the number of displaced people is currently at its highest level in a century, and the prevalence of acute food insecurity affects 58 countries, a quarter of the planet.
Well, meanwhile, the UAE and Oman have signed a memorandum of understanding to establish a railway between the two countries. This just days after Turkey, Iraq, Qatar and the UAE all agreed to develop a transit corridor. To talk more about all of that, we can go to Dubai and our correspondent, Bastien Bourri. So, Bastien, tell us more, first of all, about this deal between Oman and the UAE.
Well, the most important aspect of this project is clearly the geographical position of Oman and the port of Sohar, from which this railroad will start. If you look at a map, you can see that Sohar is located on the other side of the Strait of Hormuz, which is a very narrow strip of sea bordered by Iran, where there are two major problems basically for shipping goods. First, the narrowness in itself of the passage, which means that it is rapidly reaching saturation points, since 20% of the world's oil consumption already transits via this corridor. And then there's the presence of the Iranian Navy, which boards ships, including oil tankers, as it sees fit, as we saw again last week with this interception of a large Portuguese merchant ship linked to Israel. So this new 300-kilometer railway will make it possible to bypass this Strait of Hormuz and all the difficulties linked to it. And this would be beneficial not only for Oman's economy and tourism, which of course need to develop, but also for the UAE, who wants to become this stable platform, free from all the surrounding geopolitical problems, halfway between the east and west of the world.
Bastien, there's an awful lot of money sloshing around in the Gulf, isn't there? Why is their rail infrastructure so poorly developed?
It's true that the rail network in the whole Arabian Peninsula seems to lag behind what we see in other parts of the world. For example, there isn't even a train linking Dubai to Abu Dhabi. But it's not a matter of development. It's more a question of strategy. As you know, the Emirates have relied heavily, almost since the birth of the country 50 years ago, on air freight. And it was a fairly obvious choice, given that the country is almost entirely surrounded by the sea and halfway between Asia, Africa and Europe. So in addition to their ports, the Emiratis have given priority to their airports rather than their trains.
And Bastien, what is the UAE trying to achieve by connecting Turkey and Iraq?
It really follows on from what we've just said. This thing is all part of a desire to reconnect the countries of the region from those times when, whatever the empires or outside dominations, these regions were all linked together in a mesh of trade routes. For now, this is just an MOU, so it's a preliminary agreement for the construction of a 1,200-kilometer rail line linking southern Iraq and the Gulf to Europe via Turkey. Again, this would largely reduce shipping costs and time, and it will notably benefit the diversification of the economy of Iraq, who's still, as you know, over-reliant on oil revenues as we speak.
Bastien, thank you very much. Bastien Bourri over in Dubai. Benjamin, Anthony and Ambassador Danny Ayalon, with me in the studio. And Benjamin, we're seeing some creative solutions to try and get around the threat to global shipping from Iran and also, of course, its proxy in Yemen, the Houthis.
Yeah, absolutely. As I look at that, by the way, I'm sorry, but all that's going through my mind, I know you want to speak about the strategic implications of that, but all that's going through my mind is I wish they'd get the light rail sorted out here in Tel Aviv and Rishon and Bat Yam and the Tel Aviv.
Well sorted, isn't it?
No. There's still all sorts of problems with it. But yes, look, we're seeing, as I said earlier, when I said that I'm a skeptic about the Abraham Accords, I remain a skeptic about them. I sort of ascribe to the idea of trusting but verifying. We're seeing that they are durable, they have lasted, they did hold up. And it's very positive that Iran's ability to intercept or interfere with shipping routes is going to be reduced. I'd love to see it completely defanged, as I said about Hezbollah as well. I don't know if that's going to happen, but certainly the leverage that it has will hopefully be reduced by initiatives such as this. Let's see if it comes about and quickly.
One unintended consequence for Iran, perhaps, its Houthis harassing global shipping have actually brought the countries that are allied with Israel closer together.
Absolutely. Actually, what we see now with the MOU, but I'm not sure much will come out of it. It's more of a political ploy, I think, but it's also one of Erdogan's ideas to poke the eyes of Israel and the United States after the United States or President Biden has offered this economic corridor from India to Europe through Saudi Arabia and Israel. Now Erdogan comes with a northern route that would connect Iraq to Turkey to Europe. So definitely we're playing here very, very big strategic game, and in a way, whoever has a head start will win this geostrategical game. And I think that this is why Biden is pushing so much for a normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia in order to bring about such an enterprise which will not only keep Turkey at bay, but also, most importantly, China.
Historically, it all comes down to who controls the trade in this part of the world, isn't it? Danny Ayalon, Benjamin Anthony, thank you very much to you both. Now, with global attention focused on Gaza, Iran has been stepping up its domestic crackdown on women and has handed police extra powers to enforce its strict dress codes. Videos have been shared online of women being violently detained. At the same time, there's widespread concern for a dissident rapper called Tumash Salehi. He was one of the icons of the protest movement. Yesterday, a court sentenced him to death. Well, for more on that, we're joined by Camelia Entekabifard. She's the editor-in-chief of the Independent Persian, joining us now from UN headquarters in New York. Great to see you as always, Camelia. What exactly is happening inside Iran? Why is the regime stepping up its crackdown on women now?
Thank you very much, Yaroslava, for hosting. Good evening to you and the viewers. Usually when there is an extra pressure from the European Unions or from the EU's parties and the Islamic Republic, the direct consequences comes to the Iranian public to pay the prices. At this point, we can speak about Iran's nuclear program, which we heard in the past few weeks ago, exaggeratedly, in my opinion, showed quite very out of hands and reaching the level of making a nuclear bomb, and that become a center of the argues in the EU's and in the US and everywhere. When there is such a discussion is bringing up internationally, the direct consequences is the regime finding an opportunity under this shade to crack down the civil society activists, the human rights activists, and men and women who are not obligated themselves to the Islamic Republic laws, which is not only a law, it's an absolutely violation of the private privacy of the people. Speaking about Tumash, which is sentenced to death, unfortunately, and also cracking down the Iranian woman over the headscarf issues, hopefully it would be sorted out, I mean, the Tumash cases, and it would be only like another cases by the regime to stand in front of the international community to say they can do everything they will need it if they want to put extra pressure on them.
And Camelia, there are some signs in Europe. The governments are tightening their stance towards the regime. The UK, for example, today sanctioned an Iranian drone program. The European Parliament has voted to condemn Iran for its attack on Israel. Do you think Tehran will be paying attention to those moves?
This condemnation comes often. As soon as there is an opportunity for them, they want to show some strength and support towards the Iranians and also to limit the Islamic Republic. But we never ever saw any tangible result of these resolutions or any law passed from the EU's. If the United States sanctions the Revolutionary Guards, was the different things, because Iran and the US haven't had the diplomatic ties since the Islamic Republic launched at 45 years ago. But for the EU's is very different. They have embassy, they have their consulate, they have dual citizen people in Iran going back and forth, and they can see that Iran can expel their diplomat and shutting down the diplomatic ties with them, which it is. They are not ready for this. I believe for both sides, even for EUs, they want to just raise this Iran nuclear activities based on putting that kind of the pressure on Iran to put them back on the table. Ask my very frank opinion, I can see that soon there will be another talks between Iran, EUs, or even United States over the nuclear program. These scenarios, seeing this today at the EUs and all those talks that have nothing had to do with Islam, with the IRGC or with Iranian attacking Israel, just the Iran nuclear file, which it becomes in a very sensitive time, important for the EUs and everyone. And also I have another thought, and this is the Crown Prince of Iran, Prince Reza Pahlavi's appearances in the media. In the past couple of months ago, we can see that how actively he is representing Iranian and speaking with the variety of the media, from Russian to German to English to Arabic, everywhere. And when it comes again, he become on the board of the media, or people can see him so often, the Islamic Republic, it feels uncomfortable and try to reach another scenarios to put at public attention, international attention to that, and make them away from seeing Prince Reza Pahlavi and hearing him an exact word of the people of Iran.
Interesting. Camelia, as always, thank you very much indeed. Camelia Entekhabad there. Well, staying with Iran for a moment, a goalkeeper who hugged a female fan who ran onto the pitch has been given a 1-month suspension and a heavy fine. Hossein Hosseini is the goalkeeper for one of Iran's top clubs. With more on that and other regional sports news, we're joined in the studio by Uri Levy. He's a sports journalist and the founder of Babagol. Good to see you.
Good to see you too, Laura.
So this was the keeper of Istiklal, wasn't it? It was a very moving video, and it turns out he was, as expected, punished.
Exactly. This video has been circulating in basically running fires in the internet in Iran, in worldwide actually, in the past week and a half, I would say, since Istiklal's match against Aluminium Arak in the Iranian league, the Persian Gulf Pro League as it's called. Istiklal won 1-0, and in the end of the game, a female fan stormed the pitch without a hijab and hugged Hosseini. And Hosseini's only mistake, I would say, in the game probably was responding to this hug, hugging her back. And as you mentioned, he's now banned for 1 month and had a fine of 300,000 tumans, which is around 6,500 euros.
What was interesting, though, was the reaction of the stadium.
Exactly. When fans were basically angry against the stewards and the security guards for pushing the fan and also interrupting Hosseini from protecting her. But this is taking place in a very, I would say, boiling and turbulent era around female presence in Iranian football stadiums. Also in Tabriz there were incidents, and due to this incident of Hossein Hosseini, which is, by the way, a goalkeeper of the Iranian national team, he's a second choice goalkeeper there, right now again again, the Iranian authorities decided to stop the movement to let Iranian female fans into the stadium to watch football matches. Unfortunately, it's a movement that I am covering in the past decade, has been growing. There was, I would say, a certain progress, but unfortunately, these kinds of incidents and the response from the Iranian authorities are basically killing the process.
All right, let's talk about another story. Algeria and Morocco, they have a long-standing feud, don't they, in many arenas, and that spilled out onto the pitch.
Yeah, as always, you know, I think we reported here about this eternal rift between Morocco and Algeria and how it delves in sports. So in the past weekend, again, a massive story. Berkane, a football club from Morocco, was supposed to travel to Algeria to play Ousma Ittihad Algiers, one of the biggest clubs in Algeria, in the semi-final of the CAF Confederation Cup. Is the second most important club competition in Africa, but Berkane has put a map on their shirts, on their kits for the match, and this map, a Moroccan map.
Oh, it has Western Sahara on
Exactly, you can see it right here and on the screen. And we know that Western Sahara is the core of the conflict between Algeria and Morocco, that is also related to Morocco's relationship with Israel due to the Abraham Accords. You know, there is certain comparison between Palestine and Western Sahara that caused this rift between Morocco and Algeria. Eventually, the Algerian authorities didn't let the equipment of Berkane to enter Algeria, and Berkane decided not to.
So they forfeited the game?
Yeah, they forfeited the game, and surprisingly enough, yesterday, CAF, the African Football Confederation, decided to side by Berkane and give in 3-0 loss to Ittihad Algiers due to their refusal of entering a participating team in the competition.
How disappointing for the team. And finally, let's end with celebrations in Beersheba last night.
In Beersheba, a big game, and you know it's a rare event. Also, I think in this time, you know, the past 6 months, playing competitive sports, professional sports in Israel wasn't an easy task. We talked about it here several times, but yesterday Bloomfield Stadium hosted Hapoel Beersheba and Maccabi Netanya, and there was a festive atmosphere over there. Some would say even extremely festive atmosphere with the pyrotechnic show by Maccabi Netanya's fans, but a thrilling game, 2-2 in 90 minutes, and a goal in the 121st minute, really seconds before the penalty shootout. Dainer Quinones, the Colombian player of Hapoel Beersheba, managed to send his team to the final, and it was, you know, very nice to see thousands of Beershebans traveling here in Yafo, celebrating something that is only sports, not anything about war or suffering or sadness.
People really needed that, I think, didn't they, Uri? Okay, great stuff. Thank you so much, Uri.
Thank you, Laura.
Babagol. Thank you very much. And that brings us to the end of tonight's show. Thanks for watching. We'll be back at the same time next week. Stay tuned.
Tel Aviv is ranked the happiest city in the world and the best place to own a home. For 3 generations, the Ben Shalom family has built boutique apartment buildings in the most desirable locations. From restoration in historical locales to homes along Park HaYarkon, Ben Shalom is a one-stop shop from start to finish and friends for life.
Тоже они случайно попали. Ну тут в диаметре она, ну сколько? Ну...
Esta semana en News 24, Israel bajo ataque. News 24 en español trae el análisis y la información de los acontecimientos de la guerra, Espadas de Hierro.
Entrevistas exclusivas, reportes desde la zona de guerra, la reacción de los países hispanoparlantes.
News 24, el único medio en español que te mantiene informado y conectado con la comunidad latina en Israel. News 24, únicamente en i24 News.
Welcome to this special broadcast on I-24 News. I'm Khaled Ben David. It is day 202 of Israel at war. And the IDF is moving ahead with preparations for a longer-awaited push into Rafah, pulling out from Gaza the Nachal Brigade to prepare the troops for an offensive into that last Hamas stronghold in the Gaza Strip. At this stage, the only thing that seems likely to delay that move is advancement towards a hostage deal. And the family members of the captives are increasing public pressure on the negotiating parties following the release by Hamas of a video featuring hostage Hersh Goldberg Poland, his first sign of life since October 7th. This is the leaders of 18 nations, including U.S. President Joe Biden, issue a public statement calling on Hamas to immediately free all the hostages. But is any deal realistically on the table now before the IDF advances into Rafah? Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran takes a closer look.
Israel's war cabinet is convening on Thursday afternoon to discuss efforts to break the stalemate in negotiations between Israel and Hamas. The meeting takes on extra urgency after a Hamas video highlighted the plight of Israeli hostages.
קוראים לי הירש גולדברג פולין. אני הבן של יונתן ורייצ'ל.
The video of 23-year-old American-Israeli hostage Hersh Goldberg Poland was his first sign of life from captivity since he was kidnapped to Gaza on October 7th. Hersh had attended the Nova Music Festival at Kibbutz Re'im with friends and sought refuge in a shelter when Hamas stormed the outdoor rave. He was last seen in this video after sustaining serious wounds before taken by Hamas terrorists into Gaza.
אמא, אבא, ליבי ואורלי. אני אוהב אתכם מאוד. אני מתגעגע אליכם מאוד, ואני חושב עליכם בכל יום שאני נמצא פה. אני יודע שאתם למעלה עושים הכל כדי שאני אחזור הביתה כמה שיותר מהר. אני צריך שתישארו חזקים בשבילי, ולא להפסיק להילחם עד שאני וכל אחד ואחת מהחטופים נחזור הביתה לשלום. אני מצפה ומקווה להיות איתכם בקרוב, אחרי שכל השיגעון הזה ייגמר.
Seeing a video of Hersh today is overwhelming. We're relieved to see him alive, but we are also concerned about his health and well-being, as well as that of all of the other hostages and all of those suffering in this region.
Although Israel calls such videos psychological warfare, Hirsch's parents allowed it to air, urging Israeli leaders and international mediators to reach a deal for the release of Hirsch and the other 132 hostages, many of whom are believed to be already dead.
And Hirsch, if you can hear this, we heard your voice today for the first time in 201 days. And if you can hear us, I am telling you, we are telling you, we love you, stay strong, survive.
Shortly after the release of the video, hundreds of Israelis began protesting spontaneously outside Prime Minister Netanyahu's Jerusalem residence in what was labeled a rage demonstration. One protester was arrested during clashes with police.
133 hostages are still being held by Hamas in Gaza for over 200 days in inhumane conditions. Until Hamas releases our hostages, the IDF will continue to pursue Hamas everywhere in Gaza. This is an urgent call for action. We will leave no stone unturned in our efforts to find our hostages.
Meanwhile, calls for an Israeli initiative for a deal are growing as the time for the hostages continues to run out.
And from Wall, let's go to our correspondent, Balir Sladin. He's outside of the IDF headquarters, the Kiryat in Tel Aviv. We can see there's a protest going on, Balir, and it seems like that movement by the families of the hostages and supporters seems to have an extra spark lit in their sense of urgency following the release of that video of Hersh Goldberg Poland.
Yes, exactly. And let's take a quick look, Kalev, at what's happening here in front of the Kiryat, the IDF headquarters. People are sitting on the road here, blocking effectively the road and not letting any car drive through this place. Of course, this is a protest that includes families of the hostages as well as their supporters. They have been here since 10 a.m., 10 in the morning. So a lot of hours they're sitting here and protesting, demanding that the war cabinet and the wider cabinet take effective action toward reaching a deal with Hamas. So that's happening after 1 day of the release of a video of a 23-year-old American Israeli hostage that demands that he actually release. He calls for Netanyahu to reach a deal with Hamas after all. And regarding the latest about the deal, Caleb, we are having a new report saying that the cabinet today, and it's actually it's done, the wider cabinet, also the war cabinet, both of them have decided to propose some new proposal that could actually kick off the negotiations again. Now, what we understand from the report that Israel is willing to accept only 20 hostages released in exchange for the return of all Gazans that evacuated to the south of Gaza back to the north of Gaza. Now, Israeli officials are saying that this is a huge step from Israel that has been for months now not accepting any Gazans to go back to the north of Gaza unless there is a monitoring from Israeli soldiers, and that would be actually a huge step from the Israeli side. Now, of course, this is a proposal. We're not sure whether Hamas will accept it or not. Until now, Hamas is saying over and over again that there will be no one, even one hostage wouldn't be even released if there is no permanent ceasefire for this war. So like the end of the war and not only temporary truce for the war. After all, other reports are saying that the Egyptians have a new proposal that includes the establishment of a Palestinian state. Now, already we have comments on that from Smotrich that's saying that this could be an existential threat for Israel, and also Gideon Sa'ar, a former Likud leader, saying that this is, of course, would be a victory for Hamas and that can be accepted by Israel. And I don't personally see any majority for such a proposal in the current war cabinet or even the wider cabinet.
No, it's hard to imagine. And on the Hamas side, reports that really it's really Yehia Sinwar, the leader in Gaza, who is the ultimate one saying no at this stage, sticking to maximalist demands, despite maybe some more flexibility from those Hamas leaders outside of Gaza.
Yes, exactly. And today we have seen tremendous pressure, international pressure on Hamas. 18 countries, including the United States, Brazil, Argentina, and a lot of other European countries demanding the immediate release of the hostages in exchange for a truce. And the Hamas spokesperson already commented on that and said there will be no one hostage release without the end of this war. So Hamas is proving over and over again that it's actually immune to any interior pressure, but also to any international pressure, so external pressure on it, again and again, saying that only the permanent ceasefire, so the end of this war, would actually result in release of the hostages, something that Israel cannot accept. Of course, that's up until now.
All right, Balir Sladin, at that protest by hostage families and their supporters outside IDF headquarters. Balir, thanks for that. We're joined now in studio by Reserve's IDF Major General Eitan Dangot, a former military secretary to 3 defense ministers, former head of COGAT in the IDF, and Ambassador Daniel Sheck, former Israeli ambassador to France, now director of diplomacy, hostage and missing families forum. You've been with this hostage issue with close thought. I want to first of all get your reactions to some of these latest developments we've heard, maybe more flexibility on the number of hostage release, which may be problematic for some of the families, Daniel, and also the significance of this letter signed by 18 world leaders from major Western nations, primarily including U.S. President Joe Biden.
Yeah, so first of all, I'd like to say that this declaration is the end of a lengthy process that started with an idea by the families themselves. And the diplomats at the forum just helped them try and help it materialize. Wasn't as easy as it may sound. But in the end of the day, these are 18 out of 23 countries that have citizens in Gaza.
Right.
All of these 18 have citizens in Gaza, some several, some just one. All of them, I must say, to varying degrees, have been very good and very active for their own citizens and for the hostages individually, the individual nations. But this is something different. I mean, here you have, for the first time, a concerted effort by these 18 countries, led by the United States, obviously. It's President Biden who responded to the request of the American families to lead such an effort. And I hope that this will not end with just a declaration, but that there will be some kind of coordination between these 18 countries in order to find ways to put more pressure on
Pressure
Hamas.
on who? On Hamas? Hamas, but as you heard, the question is ultimately, is someone like Yahya Sinwar, who's barricaded in Gaza, is he vulnerable to any pressure? Will he even listen to the pressure put on those Hamas leaders who might be forced to leave Qatar?
I don't know, but I know for a fact that we need to exert as much pressure as possible. I can't evaluate the degree of, in advance, the degree of success that this will have. I know that the families want to do everything that is possible to do. We take the saying, leave no stone unturned, very literally. This is a stone that we would not leave unturned.
All right, and also the timing of this latest effort. I think there may be a sense among some people this could be a last chance before the IDF moves into Rafah. And once that ball is rolling and soldiers are fighting in harm's way, it might be too late to make another deal. So that's the question: is how might that impact on the security operations down in Gaza?
I think that you're right. It is the last chance for this round, while you have in the horizon that you don't know what will be the results in the north. In the north, we are very close to a war, in my opinion, after especially the clash with Iraq and now the tense with Hezbollah. Coming back to Gaza, it's again the fact that Gaza is the main stone for us. The main goal, release of the hostages. But in my opinion, it shows what you just described, a despair from the United States. Because before, United States has 3 times strategic that says we are going to release them under some kind of activities at the beginning of the Ramadan, towards the Eid al-Fitr, and after that should be like moving ahead everything from Gaza till the north. What is going now, it's the only thing that the first step that names is Hamas refuse, because Hamas is analyzing that their situation is much better than it was at the first round few months ago on the first release of hostages. Now what they want is 2 things. Doesn't matter how many prisoners will be released. Believe me, that can be solved.
Palestinian security.
Palestinians. What is better Sinwar? Staying in Gaza, continue to be the civil entity, and stop the war. This is his condition, and still he doesn't get it, he will not do it. And if you ask me, in my opinion, in these circumstances, we have to talk less to make war more. What does it mean? On the military side, purely, we have to continue our activities on the military side. It will not be a game changer, but it will be a game pressure, in my opinion, because you are going to block, not taking Rafah battalions, you are going to block and to close the Rafah passage, the Rafah underground tunnels, and it's for Hamas is like you closing their oxygen for the future. Secondly, Egypt is the main player now. Why? Qatar lost its...
Well, I'm going to hold off on Egypt. We're going to get to Egypt in a minute. But there was a development that sort of confirms some of what you're saying about putting the pressure on Hamas and their goal. For example, top Hamas official Khalil al-Hawa said shortly after October 7th that the terror group's attack was just the beginning of a permanent state of war against Israel aimed at sparking off a broader regional conflict. But after 6 months of war and retreat by Hamas in Gaza, suddenly he's singing a different tune in a new interview this week, claiming the group is now willing to lay down its arms for a peace deal that would see a Palestinian state within the 1967 borders. Now, whether this change of heart is genuine or it's merely a stalling tactic, it's still not likely to delay an IDF push into Rafah to finish Hamas off in Gaza. Jeff Abramowitz takes a closer look.
As the Israeli army steps up plans for an operation in Rafah, the last stronghold of Hamas's military wing in the Gaza Strip, the Hamas leadership abroad is drawing its own conclusion.
Israel has hit the resistance with great blows, but has not ended it, and they say so. They have not destroyed more than 20% of Hamas's capabilities, neither human nor in the field. If they can't finish Hamas off, what is the solution? The solution is to go to consensus.
In an interview with the Associated Press, the senior Hamas official repeated the organization's unrealistic demand to end the war in the Gaza Strip and went even further.
We have repeatedly offered the establishment of a fully sovereign Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza and the return of refugees in accordance with the international resolutions that have emerged in this regard. We will live in a state and establish and agree on a ceasefire and a truce of 5 years or more in order to live in security.
But according to the US, the leader of Hamas inside Gaza, Yahya Sinwar, is rejecting any attempt to reach a deal which would free the Israeli hostages, a position that's prompting Israel to finalize plans for the Rafah operation.
This victory requires entry into Rafah and the elimination of the terrorist battalions there. It will happen. There is a date.
According to Israel's Channel 12, the IDF has come up with a 4-step plan to evacuate nearly 1.5 million Palestinians from the combat zone. Continuous delivery of humanitarian aid according to needs. Aid trucks will have secured routes, while the transport of goods will be delivered further north in the Gaza Strip because of the evacuation of the population from Rafah. Step 2. Restoring essential infrastructure. Step 3. Accessing medical services to ensure Gazans have access to medical services, to hospitals within the Strip and to field hospitals. Step 4. Coordinating shelter for the population to be evacuated from Rafah. Among the 10 towns that were established by Egypt and the UAE, the IDF has purchased 40,000 tents to be transferred to Gaza in the coming days. Meanwhile, I-24 News can report exclusively that Gazan terrorists fired mortars at the humanitarian port being constructed off the coast of Gaza.
We know that several American tools were damaged as a result of that launch, and also one person was lightly wounded when he was running for shelter.
The IDF assumption is that the evacuation of Palestinians from Rafah will take 3 to 4 weeks, but fighting can begin before it will be complete.
And as we heard, any IDF push into Rafah will require coordination with Egypt, as the town sits right on the border with Sinai. And here's what Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi had to say about Gaza today.
Since the developments that the region has witnessed over the past months and the Israeli war on the Gaza Strip, the Egyptian stance from the first moment has been to completely reject any displacement of the Palestinians from their land into Sinai or any other place in order to protect the Palestinian cause from liquidation and to defend Egypt's national security. Also, our steadfast position of determination to work extensively towards reaching a ceasefire and ensuring access for humanitarian aid and efforts to establish the Palestinian independent and sovereign state in order for the Palestinians to gain their legitimate rights.
So that's the question. You heard what Sisi said, publicly at least, after those top Israeli defense officials were in Cairo. Is Egypt on board, ready to coordinate with Israel with the Rafah operation?
I think Egypt already has coordinated, and it's going all over the war and even before. What the president of Egypt says, he says to his nation, to his public opinion, and he's very sensitive to it. Secondly, Egypt is not going to receive the Palestinian from Gaza inside Egypt. I think Israel, as a principle, accept it, of course. What was done in Egypt by the visit of the Chief of Defense Staff and
this week, yeah,
the head of the Mossad or Shabak together, they came and explained to coordinate to lower Egypt's concerns about such a step and to hear remarks, other kind of thing from Egypt. What is very clear to me is wherever there is a chance to make in the coming days any kind of agreement of releasing all the hostages in stopping the war, in my opinion, Israel should do it.
In delaying the war, not stopping.
Yes, of course. And it will take time in a ceasefire, etc. Hamas will stay in Gaza as a guerrilla. It will take no months, Caleb. It will take years in order to lower the terror. But first of all, we should get back those people.
Okay, but I do want to ask...
On the other end, just to complete my saying, the military activity disturb, in my opinion, Hamas. You see first signs of, as you brought, some kind of speaking by Hamas spokesman about this situation. As more as we will be close, you will see tense inside Hamas, because for them is closing the area of Gaza, for giving them the last window or a door to pass
putting them in a
to
trap.
Egypt.
But Daniel, if there is no hostage deal, and you see Israel taking these steps to try to relieve relocate the civilian population, will Israel have the diplomatic support, most crucially of the U.S., maybe, and some of those European states, to continue this operation into Rafah?
My short answer will be no.
Okay.
I don't think that you can convince the United States and European powers to support an all-out operation in Rafah. But this is not black and white, so it's not either nothing or a massive incursion into Rafah. We might be able to achieve some kind of agreement of gradual or pinpointed activities with the United States. I think it's going to be more difficult with European countries. But I'd like to get back to Egypt.
Yeah.
Because Egypt is a crucial strategic partner for Israel. And Israel must tread very carefully on the issue of that border.
Sure.
On the other hand, I don't need the Egyptians to declare that they agree to what Israel is doing. They just need to do it.
Right.
So as Eitan Dangot, my friend, just said, as President al-Sisi has an audience in Egypt, he needs to keep them safe and keep them on side. The truth is that there is very close coordination for years now between Israel and Egypt on security.
Right. We've seen Egyptian officials, including President al-Sisi, say one thing publicly and then the Egyptians act on the ground somewhat differently and more quietly. But of course, the wild card in all of this is what could happen in northern Israel with Hezbollah and other Iranian proxies if there is no hostage deal and there is a push into Rafah. Well, let's go to our correspondent in northern Israel, Zach Anders. And Zach, we seem to be back to kind of the status quo there in the north, but of course, a crucial time whether a hostage deal would bring maybe some quiet in the north as well. And if it is not, and there's a push into Rafah, how Iranian proxies like Hezbollah will react.
Yeah, and potentially some of the cross-border fire that we saw yesterday, which was quite heavy in comparison in context to what we usually see here. Potentially that is some of the work that the IDF is doing to undercut the Hezbollah threat as close as it is, because the amount of activity we saw yesterday and the IDF saying that they struck some 40 targets was right there on the border. Very close activity, some of the airstrikes that we were seeing. Today, it's been much quieter in comparison to yesterday. Only 3 attacks Hezbollah has claimed responsibility for. It does not appear that there's been any casualties or any reports of damage to civilian homes or businesses. The Hezbollah attacks appear to be once again targeting IDF outposts right along the border. I also realized today that I had missed an update in one of my reports from Wednesday, because the Ministry of Health in Lebanon released their figures, an update on Wednesday. They say 92,000 Lebanese are displaced right now in southern Lebanon, and that there's been 344 deaths that the Ministry of Health has logged. 88% of those are men, and 59% of those are aged 25 to 44 years old. And that speaks to what we're seeing Hezbollah's own reporting of their numbers as well. So this correlates, but it is once again remarkable to see the number of displaced people. I know we talk a lot about northern Israel and how there's 60,000 plus displaced. Southern Lebanon as well. They're in the grips of Hezbollah's total autonomy over southern Lebanon. Obviously, many different factions, many different religions, Christians fleeing from these areas as well, trying to get away from the fighting and trying to get away from the brutality that Hezbollah has placed upon southern Lebanon.
All right. Well, unfortunately, though, we don't necessarily see public protests, especially we know that Hezbollah keeps a firm grip on southern Lebanon and not, as it were, the Lebanese government or what remains of the Lebanese government there. Zach Anders there in northern Israel. Thank you for that. We've just a minute to go. Eitan, if there is a push into Rafah, an intensification from Hezbollah, maybe other Iranian proxies, briefly.
I think that, first of all, Hezbollah is still waiting under his claim that in a situation while fire in Gaza is stopping on the war is stopped, they will stop the fire with Israel. I think that it still gives some kind of, let's say, a gap to try to check it in the coming weeks. But on the other end, I think we lost time and patience. We are very close with Hezbollah to come to something close to a war.
Well, let's hope we don't reach that point. Eitan Dango to Ambassador Daniel Shek. Please stay with us. We are going out for a brief break, but we'll serve more of this special broadcast, day 202, more than 200 days of Israel at war on several fronts. Stay with us.
I-24 News Channel, broadcasting from Israel, with dozens of correspondents throughout the world, brings the truth from Israel to hundreds of millions of people in scores of countries.
Completely gunned down in their beds. De la frontière qui sépare Israël. The state of emergency and war in Israel.
Bringing Israel's story to the world. I-24 News Channels. Now on Hot.
Ой, осторожно. У него мало таких бородавочек, у него как-то побольше на спине.
Welcome back to this special broadcast on I-24 News. Now, as we've already noted, following the release of the Sign of Life video of Gaza hostage Hersh Goldberg, Poland, family members of the remaining 133 captives are stepping up their calls and public pressure, including demonstrations, including right now outside IDF headquarters in Tel Aviv, in order to get the Israeli government and all the negotiating parties to advance quickly to a deal that would see some of those released. Among those joining in these calls is Yotam Cohen, whose brother Nimrod was taken prisoner on October 7th as he was battling on the Gaza border against the Hamas terrorists as a soldier in the Armored Brigade. And joining us now is Yotam Cohen, brother of Nimrod Cohen, Gaza hostage Nimrod Cohen, speaking to us from the town of Rehovot. First of all, Yotam, thank you for joining us. I do believe this is the first time we've had a member of your family on the program. So first, let's just start. Tell us about your brother, the person he is, and what you know about October 7th.
Nimrod, my brother, is my younger brother. We are 3 years apart. Nimrod was a soldier, the IDF. He was stationed at the border before the 7th of October on the southern part of the Gazan border. On the morning of the 7th of October, he and his crew members, I heard on the radio that there was a breach on the border near two near villages, near Oz and Nirim, and they rushed to the border to stop the mass of terrorists who were storming the villages, slaughtering, raping civilians. And on the struggle, he and his teammates were captured. Out of the 4 of them, they were all taken, but 2 of them were taken alive, Nimrod included, and 2 of them were taken after they were murdered, executed there on the spot. We know from one of the hostages who came back on the first deal that Nimrod, she said she saw him, and that he's there in the tunnel, relatively healthy. And that's why we're fighting for a deal. We want to see him again as soon as possible.
Right, and I have to imagine, Yotam, this is an emotional week for your family. The Pesach holiday, Passover, there were so many hopes going into that. The deal didn't materialize. Now this video came out of Hersh Goldberg, Poland, a sign of life of someone who hadn't been heard of for over 200 days, like your brother, even though, as you said, you had this testimony. Just maybe talk a little about that, the impact on you and your family of just this past week.
First of all, Passover is the Jewish holiday of freedom, of liberty, and the fact that we're celebrating or marking the holiday when 133 hostages are still held in Gaza just exemplifies the loss or the vacuum that was created on the 7th of October. And as you mentioned, seeing the video of the hostage who we saw being kidnapped, injured, we all saw the video with him with a lost, without a hand, holding the hand and climbing up to a Hamas vehicle, and then this week seeing him alive, but most definitely injured. On the one hand, it's terrible seeing someone like that and hearing his cry and the message he delivers. And on the other hand, his family, and I'm sure many of us, were happy to see a sign of life from him.
Now,
so it's happiness mixed with sadness.
Totally understandable. And Yotam, you alluded to it. Your family, you've been part of the campaign. Your father, Yehuda, I believe, Vicky, and your mom, Vicky, your sister. You have a sister, was a twin sister, correct? Of Nimrod. Have all been outspoken. Your father been quite outspoken after meeting Prime Minister Netanyahu. What is your message this evening, both to the Israeli government and, of course, to all the parties involved in negotiating, including to Hamas, in getting the release of your brother and the other hostages?
So a part of the pressure we're putting internationally, and we always keep on doing that even these days, we're going abroad and speaking to many politicians and media worldwide. We think that some pressure should be put on the war cabinet and on the government, and especially the prime minister, to accept a deal. Because as we know, as the day go on, more and more hostages are announced dead. And we are afraid that if a deal is not accepted, these days the IDF will go into Rafah, which result in many casualties, including hostages, because the presence of IDF in Rafah endangers the hostage, the proximity endangers them. And we think that more and more hostages will die in captivity. And that's why we're calling to the war cabinet and to the government to first accept the deal, even if it includes holding out the war or stopping even the war and having a ceasefire. And in the future, we can deal with Hamas later, but every hostage who dies won't come back to life. When you're dead, but you can still eliminate Hamas in the future.
All right. Yotam Cohen, of course, most of all, we wish you a happy holiday, and we wish you and your family to see the safe return of your brother Nimrod with all his family and all the remaining hostages in Gaza. And we thank you for joining us here on I-24 News.
Thank you very much.
And I'll just say, gentlemen, you heard it from Yotam confirming some of the points we've made. A really sense among the hostages this could be a potential last opportunity, certainly to get many of them out, the remaining out safely.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned earlier that maybe the numbers might create some tension among the families. I think the general idea is at this point that whoever you can get out, get them out. Don't argue about lists, about criteria. You can get 20 people out. First of all, get them out, and then we'll see. And you know, Yotam and his family. I spent quite a lot of time with his mother on a trip to Prague a couple of months ago. These people, you know, nothing prepared Yotam to analyze the strategic situation with Hamas. It's not his job. These people speak from their gut, from their heart. Right. And that's the only thing you should expect from them. So all the discussions about, is the price worth it? Is it justifiable? All that is not fair to put on the shoulders of the family.
Understandable, yeah, understandable, and that's why I don't raise that
absolutely,
question.
I know.
Don't raise that question.
I absolutely.
That's a discussion in Israeli society, yes. But you have to understand their perspective and accept it. Let's shift focus now to the U.S., especially the protest encampments that have sprouted across several American university campuses, ostensibly to express opposition to Israel's Gaza operation. But they have devolved, you could say, in many cases into protests in support for Hamas and its aims and anti-Semitic invective. Now some of those protests are encountering opposition from schools and local authorities. Including at the University of Texas, Austin, at USC Los Angeles, at Boston's Emerson College, and at Yale, where police have arrested hundreds of protesters for trespassing and other charges. Now, these demonstrations have become a major national political issue now in the U.S. Here's the Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson and the White House spokesperson Karine Jean-Pierre addressing the situation.
To every Jewish student listening to us, no matter where you are around the country, you have my word. The U.S. House of Representatives will do everything in our power to ensure that you are safe, you can freely practice your faith, and you can go to school just like everybody else. This is dangerous. This is not free expression. This is not First Amendment. They are threatening, intimidating, saying that they will take violence upon Jewish students. We met with Jewish students who are in fear. They can't come on campus. They can't study for their final exams.
The president believes that free speech, debate, and non-discrimination on college campuses are important. They're important American values, and that and so he'll always be very clear. We will always be very clear about that here. Students should feel safe. Communities should feel safe, and we can't stay silent. Obviously, it is a deeply painful moment. He sees that. He understands that.
From all, let's go to our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim in New York. And Mike, it does seem maybe this situation is reaching a tipping point where the actions of the protesters have become so brazen, there's finally serious pushback from authorities and going up all the way to Congress and the White House now.
Yeah, there's only so far you can go, and just creating disruption and disorder. Columbia University moving to remote learning for the rest of the school year. We've seen what happened on other campuses. Harvard, whether they want to admit it or not, turned on the sprinklers in the middle of the night to try to get the protesters off the lawn there. It's gotten out of hand, certainly so, not just in the sheer numbers, but the disruption throughout the campuses. And we heard from the Deputy Press Secretary, Andrew Bates, from the White House a few days ago, condemning the anti-Semitic nature of some of these protests and protesters. But the only comment we've heard out of President Joe Biden so far was on his way through the White House lawn itself, saying that he condemns, yes, the anti-Semitic nature of some of these calls on these college campuses, but also he condemns what he said is people not understanding what the Palestinians are going through. And critics say it's kind of that two-sidesism that Biden criticized Donald Trump for during the Charlottesville incident, which Biden said led him to running for president. It's filtered down now, as you mentioned, to Congress. There are calls to defund some of these universities, including Columbia University. Although that's a long, arduous process that goes through a number of layers, could be months, years before those investigations as to whether this is even anti-Semitism is even complete. And keep in mind the Biden administration hasn't finalized the definition of anti-Semitism yet. It's not due now until December, after a number of delays have transpired. So on a federal level, kind of stuck in gear right now. We've seen now at the state level today, at least here in New York, the Republican conference within the New York State Senate is calling for the National Guard to come in, at least to Columbia University, calling on the Columbia University president to resign, and for Democratic Governor Kathleen Hochul to support at least some of these measures. Meanwhile, at the city level, kind of astounding, the New York Police Department, which was banned from coming in to the Columbia campus a few days ago, responded to Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who chided and criticized the police for their actions on campus a few days ago. The chief of patrol from the NYPD, John Snell, tweeted out this morning that students are finally seeing the consequences of their actions, something they likely never were taught. That's harsh language from the chief of patrol of the NYPD. He said the only incidents on these campuses were those of students espousing hateful anti-Semitic speech and vile remarks toward the police officers themselves. There were no other incidents to report. So now this is going now from a White House congressional matter to a local police force congressional matter. It has just spanned the spectrum of politics, law enforcement, academia. It has really become an all-encumbering phenomenon here within American college campuses.
Right, and I'm sure, and we'll have plenty of opportunity to speak about it. It's going to play into the upcoming elections in the U.S., nationally, on congressional level, and of course, I think we're really just at the beginning of this sort of chaos that's taken over many of the schools there. Thank you, Mike Wagenheim in New York. Now, what we're seeing on U.S. campuses in recent days is certainly in part a result of the way in which new tech, especially social media, is being used to broadly disseminate anti-Semitic and Israel incitement material. But can new tech be used also to if new tech can be used to promote anti-Semitism, surely it could also be used to fight it. And that's the goal of a new initiative called the Adir Challenge, a competition offering $1 million to help fund new tech designed to combat Jew hatred. And joining us now is Moria Lotan, co-founder and CEO of that Adir Challenge. And Moria, before we get into the specifics of the Adir Challenge, I know you have a very personal motive for taking on this initiative, and maybe talk a little about that.
Sure. Thank you for having me. Adir is my oldest nephew, my sister's oldest son, Adir Masika, who was killed at the Nova Festival on October 7th. So that is my fuel. My family is my fuel. My friends who are all living here and abroad. And it's personal both because he was my nephew, but also because I think as a community, if this isn't personal, what is?
Right. Now you're involved in the tech field as a we should say as a consultant, I believe, especially startups dealing with climate change.
Right.
So talk about the decision to found this. I know there was other people involved too. The decision to do this. Why choose tech? And what are the specifics of it?
Yeah. So first of all, the moment of the decision was really I wanted to shut down my climate business. What kind of a world are we trying to save by working on climate initiatives if it's not one we can raise our kids in? For us, for both Dr. Shai Hershkovitz and myself, who's my co-founder, he's the former director of research at X Prize, a nonprofit based in LA that run open innovation competitions. It was clear that we are at a lag. We're talking about a 25-year at least delay between other organizations rallying around what we're seeing today on college campuses, and we needed something at scale, and we needed something that the Jewish mind is excellent at. So we brought the startup mindset to legacy organizations that didn't have tech-centric strategies around anti-Semitism, and we launched the Adir Challenge as a global innovation and technology challenge to combat anti-Semitism and hate.
Well, as you mentioned, there's a sort of catch-up quality being played here. I mean, the anti-Semitism is also described as the world's oldest hate. And maybe, I think, Jewish organizations, bodies in the state of Israel, including government bodies that deal with anti-Semitism, were kind of caught by surprise at the way in which these tech, especially the social media platforms, were utilized in order to spread anti-Semitism.
Oh, for sure. I think that the true strategic surprise that we should all be paying attention to is not the October 7th Israeli intelligence surprise. It's the surprise of the international community, specifically the Jewish community and those bodies that were responsible for tackling and combating anti-Semitism. The thing is that they've mostly been done historically as a very reactive effort. And we believe in a proactive effort that sees technology as a way to bring together at the speed that we really need in order to catch up what we're clearly lagging behind once again. We have 253 teams, almost now 300 as of this morning, teams from 21 countries who have submitted ideas. It's pretty amazing.
Can you, now look, this is a competition, and I can't ask you to tip which ideas, but just give us a sense of what we're talking about, especially people who are less tech savvy.
Yeah.
So we know anti-Semitism is being spread in so many different ways at the grassroots level, and including via these tech things. So what would be, in general, what are you looking for?
Well, I'll take you to two extremes.
Okay.
On one extreme, we're looking at predictive AI and artificial intelligence, obviously, new algorithms, and you're looking at legal technologies that can quickly close the loop and be more of the punishment-oriented technologies. On the other hand...
So in other words, but you mean in order to compel either social media companies or local authorities...
Or people who you see today who are trying to cover themselves by wearing a keffiyeh or, covered up in makeup so that we can't see them visually, so that we can trace them. Those are the kind of technologies that we might be able to...
Interesting, because there are people who have been trying to do this. It almost erupted as an ad hoc way, people tearing down posters in New York, and you're saying to get a kind of tech that could be
Well, imagine
utilized.
if I could tell you as an employer, that your employees were at X, Y, and Z demonstration calling for the killing of Jews. I mean, and you could do something about their employment or fire them on the spot. That might be a good deterrent.
Right, and do it quickly without having to go through days on searching on an internet. Okay,
that's right.
That's one example.
So the other example, which was probably more surprising, are in the positive psychology. So psychology and technology where they cross, where you're talking about increase in empathy, decreasing seeing someone else as the other, dehumanizing them. And of course, we see a lot of ideas coming in the realm of social media, because as we all know, social media is absolutely spreading things like wildfire.
Right. Now, one of the few tech is, we have to say that, one of the few areas in which Israel has leverage I was in the business community, but not just in the world, which is why we see the Elon Musks and other tech leaders coming to Israel, is in the tech field. So how reactive have they been in mobilizing their power? And it is the tech community in Israel has power. Some might even say beyond the influence of the government when it comes internationally. So how is that response been?
Israel right now, out of the 4 leading countries that are participating in the challenge, are number 1. So I'm hoping that we're always going to see Israel as number 1. It's our expectation and our belief that the Israeli startup know-how is exactly what we need. Number 2, there's a decision that needs to be made that this isn't just their problem, their being the Jewish diaspora, but there is a strategic, extremely important link between a strong Jewish diaspora and a strong Israel. And I think we're going to be able to see that come about more as the challenge expands.
Okay, now just as a practical matter, if there's any tech entrepreneurs or tech thinkers out there, is it still possible to enter? And there is a website,
it's www.theadirchallenge.com.
The Adir, spelled A-D-I-R.
Challenge. And April 30th, we're closing the first stage of our Idea Challenge. So you still have a few days and more than enough time to submit an idea.
Okay, so I want to say if there's any future tech geniuses or current that want to get involved in there, please get going on it. And as you heard, it's the Adir Challenge, A-D-I-R, and perhaps you'll come up with something positive from the world of tech in defending the Jewish people in the world against anti-Semitism. I want to thank Moria Lotan for joining us, and of course, Eitan Dangot, Ambassador Daniel Sheck. Thank you for being with us. And certainly the next item relates to a lot of what we've been talking about here this evening. We often hear about bereaved families and the survivors of Hamas's brutal attack on Israel on October 7th, saying they don't feel like they're getting enough support from the world, from the authorities, from the society. Well, some Israeli civilians have decided to take matters into their own hands. And take a look at one such effort in this report by our anchor and correspondent, Natasha Kirchuk.
Do I have to be politically correct? Because there's shit. Like, we don't, holidays? Like, happy holiday? No way. Just the idea of a holiday without my sister and my brother-in-law is unbearable.
How do you wish a happy holiday to somebody who's grieving? That's what this group of volunteers are preparing to do. Tonight, they're celebrating Passover with over 50 bereaved families whose loved ones were killed on October 7th, and some of the survivors of Hamas's murderous rampage.
לתת לזה הכרה, לתת לזה מקום שקשה עדיין לישון בלילה, שלפעמים עדיין יש קולות, שלפעמים אפילו הם מתגברים, שקשה לקום לעבודה.
This is Adama Tova, a makeshift healing center. 3 days a week, bereaved families and survivors gather here.
It takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village to lose a child and to continue. The 3 of us lost our children at the Nova Party Festival.
My son was 28, near 29.
My son 24, 2 months before 25.
28. It's been over 6 months since that dark Saturday when Hamas infiltrated southern Israel, massacring around 1,200 people. But the pain that their family members have been experiencing every single day since isn't going away. For many, their only solace is coming here, where volunteers are on hand to provide counseling, art therapy, and hot meals, or just the space to blow off steam.
We call it waves, waves of pain. We don't always have, I think, the patience to be with our families, our friends from before. They don't really get what we feel. We learn how to walk again, talk again, eat again, sleep again, and breathe again. It's a new breathing.
ולא ינחתי איתך לשמוע מה את צריכה. אני צריכה ככה להיות בפלואו. גם את צריכה, ואת צריכה להיות בפלואו. ולא להיות בתפקיד.
נכון, זה כבר יבוא.
אוקיי, אז את לא בתפקיד. ואת עדיין אהובה ושווה.
מה זה? רווקה שקולה.
זה באסה שהבן שלי צעיר מדי.
This is Bar Yuval Shani. She's a psychotherapist, and she's also the sister of Deborah Matias, an American-Israeli citizen who was brutally murdered in her home in southern Israel by Hamas terrorists.
My sister and her husband were massacred on the 7th of October. They lived in Kibbutz Cholit. They were musicians and peace activists. They were with their son, their 16-year-old son, Rotem. The terrorists had come in and used explosives to open the safe room. They had severed my brother-in-law's hand, and my sister threw herself on my nephew and took all the bullets and the grenades, and he was saved.
Today, Bar comes 3 times a week to Adama Tova. She runs a therapy class for others just like her, whose siblings were also killed.
It's like this is a new life. The old life is no more. And it's tremendously painful when people come up and say to us things like, you know, happy holiday, or, well, life must go on, but our lives are not going on. You need to grieve in community. We need to hold that grief together, and we need to hold the healing together. You can't do that on your own in a therapist's room.
From trauma, like 10% get PTSD, post-trauma. So it's very difficult to be able to take this trauma and to say, okay, it's been in the 7th of October, and now we're coming back to life.
That's Einat Chaimovich. She's a psychotherapist who built this place in her very own backyard. After Hamas's brutal attack on October 7th, she and her partner Iftach, who struggles with PTSD, decided that they had to do something to help.
It's not just that people were killed. 3 children in my family are orphaned. They have no mother, no father, no house. We're all traumatized. The entire country is traumatized.
Tonight's Passover dinner is an attempt to make sure that not one person here feels alone.
אנחנו הדור ששוב באו אלינו לכלותנו, ואני מאחלת שבת אחים גם יחד, והחברות המדהימה הזאת שנוצרה כאן. אז אני רק רוצה שבכל זאת נרים לחיים ותסתכלו טוב טוב בעיניים של האנשים שנמצאים סביבכם. אז לחיים ושנשתכר הרבה.
That is certainly a worthy effort. Now that brings an end to the program, this evening's program. We're going to be you could still follow us on our social media, including our webpage, but we are going to be not have a new show until after the Pesach holiday concludes. So we'll be back on the air with a new program on Tuesday.